Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our new series, Inspiring Ideas from Experts in the Field. This webinar is a new workshop format for NOFA and our hope is that we can make quality farm management education easily accessible to everyone. My name is Brittany Overshiner, and I'm the Beginning Farmer Program Coordinator for NOFA. My email is brittany@nofamass.org. Feel free to contact me with feedback about this webinar or with any beginning farmer questions. Before we start tonight, I would like to thank our sponsors, Frontier Natural Products and Lancaster Agriculture, for supporting the production of this series. I'd also like to thank New Entry Sustainable Farming Project and Tufts Friedman School of Nutritional Science and Policy for providing access to the WebEx software we are using to host the workshop. Also, many thanks to the NOFA board and staff who have helped make this workshop possible. If you're not a member of NOFA, please consider joining to support our education and policy work. You can visit our website to learn more, nofamass.org. Tonight's presenter is Liz Joseph of Heifer Farm in Rutland, Mass. Liz has been successfully managing a no-till and hand-tilled 1-acre garden for the last 5 years. The format will be a presentation from Liz to start with some participation and then a question and answer session to follow. We're going to do a little experiment now to make sure people know how to use the chat function. So I'm going to show you on the screen. Up in the right-hand corner, there's a little button that says chat, and if you want, you can type in your name or your location, your farm name, a little bit of information about yourself would be awesome. It'll give us an idea of who's participating, and that way Liz won't feel like she's talking into the void. So in the chat function, go ahead, scroll down to the bottom. You can type it to send to everybody, and you can type your name, your farm, your town. While you guys are working on that, just one other thing I want to let you know. If you are calling by phone and you can't use the chat function, if you do want to ask Liz a question and you have the capacity to, you can text me a question and I can type it in. My phone number is 857-383-7020. That's 857-383-7020. Now I'm going to hand the controls over to Liz and get the workshop started. We've got a lot of participants tonight. Liz, there you are.
I'm here.
You are going to be, sorry, the presenter. All right, you're good to go.
All right, so while you're typing in the chat, if you want to confirm, you can see the PowerPoint. We're going to be referencing that quite a bit this evening. Brittany, can you see it as at least one confirmation?
Yes, I can see it, Liz. Looks good.
Okay, great. So, hi, everybody. My name is Liz Joseph. I work at Heifer Farm in Rutland, as Brittany mentioned. Excited to share with you all tonight what my experience has been transitioning our field from a 1-acre field, so pretty small scale, but we were previously doing lots of tillage and have transitioned to reduced till, no-till situation. So excited to share that with you all. This is my first webinar, so excited to see how that goes as well, and just glad that you're all here tonight. So let's see, without further ado, go to the next screen. So I mentioned I work at Heifer Farm in Rutland, just to give a little bit of background and context. Rutland is in central Massachusetts. We're an educational farm that's part of the Learning Center Heifer International, which is working in over 33 countries currently, and the mission of Heifer International is to work with communities to end hunger and poverty and care for the earth. So what we're trying to do at Heifer Farm is teach people who come to the farm. We've got lots of groups, school groups and congregations and families that come out and learn about issues of hunger and poverty in the world and solutions through sustainable agriculture. So we have gardens on site, we have livestock, and all of that is trying to be a model of what that looks like. So invite you all to come out sometime. We are open to the public free of charge 7 days a week. So do come on by. And as we, start here tonight, I wanted to open with this quote. And for anyone who's calling in, I'll go ahead and read it out loud. It says, an organic farm, properly speaking, is not one that uses certain methods and substances and avoids others. It is a farm whose structure is formed in imitation of the structure of a natural system that has the integrity, independence, and benign dependence. And that is from Wendell Berry's The Gift of Good Land. And the reason I wanted to start with that is because as much as the tips and techniques and methods that we use are important, and we're going to go over a lot of them tonight, I really feel like a lot of our success in doing this system has come from this sentiment, which essentially to me is saying, you know, we're trying to mimic nature. We're trying to look to nature as the ultimate teacher, as what it looks like to have a thriving and sustainable growing system. And so I think for us, you know, it wouldn't be too much of an exaggeration to say that a large percentage of our success has, I think, been just as much about mindset and a way of thinking as it has been about the techniques that we're using. And really, it was the mindset, this kind of idea of mimicking nature, that led us to the no-till to begin with. We didn't decide one day to, oh, let's do no-till. I hadn't heard of that terminology yet. We just were trying to farm the way we saw nature growing plants and doing it very successfully. And we're trying to mimic that, and that led us to a system where we were leaving the soil intact as much as possible. So I just wanted to encourage folks, especially if there's beginning farmers out there, to really think about, like, what is your growing philosophy? And this speaks, you know, appeals to me, I think, as well. I was an English and philosophy major in college turned farmer, so I kind of like that sort of maybe lofty thinking, but I do think it is important, and the ones you see on the screen here are things that you'll hear me say. You know, people who have worked with me in the field will hear me saying these things quite a bit, and folks that come to the farm and ask questions like, well, how do you deal with weeds, or how do you deal with pests or diseases, or how do you grow big leeks or a sweet carrot or a juicy tomato? The answer is never like a straightforward, oh, well, we plant this variety at this spacing, etc. It's more of these sort of philosophical ideas like, well, we take care of the soil and we make sure we have good soil fertility and we keep the ground covered, and etc., etc. So all that's just to say, I think that we shouldn't underestimate how important it is to really think about what your mindset is and what your approach is. And then I think once you have that, it'll inform the techniques that follow. At least that was the case for us, and I do think has been instrumental in some of our success in doing this. And if folks have some of your own kind of growing philosophies or things that you try to do in your field that guide you in terms of what method you're going to use, that would be a very neat thing, I think, to share in the chat feature. And for people that can't see the screen, I'll just read these quickly. So certainly we talk about soil all the time. The answer to all those questions about how to grow crops, we always are talking about soil from the ground up, right along those lines. Often you'll hear me say, well, microbes need to eat before I eat, so what do I need to do to make those microbes happy? Definitely keeping the ground covered is something we emphasize quite a bit. You really don't see bare soil in nature, so that is something we've tried to look at nature and mimic, and something we were not doing previously. Trying to work smarter, not harder. People have heard that one before. Mimicking nature we've talked about. Healthy soil equals healthy plants, and the end of that you could then take farther and say equals healthy people. Sometimes I'll often think to myself, well, what's the function of a weed? What's the function of a pest? And the answers to those questions can also give you more of an understanding about how to do some management. Speak to the earth and it will teach you is from I believe, the book of Job in the Bible, but I love that sentiment in terms of learning from the land itself. And Wendell Berry, another one of his quotes is, go with your love to the field. So having that positive energy and I think putting that energy into it has been important. And then I stole this one from my brother, who's a teacher in Newark, New Jersey, humble and hungry. So really passionate, but, always remembering that we are really facilitators of this process. And when I first started farming, people would say things like, wow, that, looks great, great vegetables, great job. And I felt like I actually had very little to do with it. But it was sort of a miracle the way the seed in the ground would turn into this gorgeous produce. And so I think that kind of sentiment has been important for us too. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Going more into the management techniques and tips. So we're talking about no-till. This is our farm here, tilling in a rye cover crop in the spring a few years ago, plowing it. We have to think about, why do we till to begin with? So these other folks might have other reasons, but these were the reasons that we were coming up against at Heifer Farm. We were wanting to either establish new garden space. We wanted to prep our beds in the springtime. We certainly were tilling to deal with weeds that would inevitably come up during the season, and would need to reset that going into the fall to put in a cover crop or to put in the next planting. So those are some practical reasons. I also think there's some other reasons, like it's just what it's what we learned. The farm that, many of us either worked at, or some folks might have grown up on a farm. If that's what you learned, I think often that's what you then go on to do. And this last one was certainly true for me, and I'm not even a very mechanically inclined person, but I am sort of a perfectionist, and I really liked the look of a nice, clean, plowed, disked field. There was something really nice about starting off on that really clean slate. And so it's been a little bit of an adjustment to get used to not planting into that perfectly, tilled seed bed. But I think it's interesting to think about, what are the reasons folks are tilling right now? And I guess another one you could add on here is just there's an efficiency to it as well. So the core concept of then moving to a no-till or reduced till system, and the idea is we're simply just trying to keep the soil intact. And by doing so, we're going to be improving the soil structure and the soil biology, both of which our crops are reliant on. So again, it's a system working to mimic nature, and I think if done well, can have the benefit of reducing labor and money and equipment that goes into the growing. So really the concept of no-till is just to keep that soil intact, not turning it over or turning it up with tillage implements. So before we get into how we did it at Heifer, we're just going to go over a few of the benefits of doing it in case there's some beginners on the line. And these all play off of each other, certainly, but the first is the benefit of your soil structure. So what I mean when I say soil structure is the aggregates that hold the soil together, that the roots are moving through. It's where the microbes are living. It's the air and the water that's being held, the drainage of your field, etc. So if we're thinking about the structure, the infrastructure of what our plants need to grow in, we're really working from the ground up. And when we're tilling, we're turning that over and we're churning it up, and we're really disrupting that system. And I heard someone use the analogy once that stuck with me of what would happen to the city of Paris, I don't know if it's Paris, but a city, if you were to take out all the below ground infrastructure. So you can imagine there would be, subways and water lines and sewage lines and electrical lines and the foundations of buildings. All of these things are the roots of trees. All of these things are below ground. And above ground, you've got your buildings and your people moving about and your Eiffel Tower, etc. And so if you were to completely just wipe out that below ground infrastructure of the city of Paris, you would have complete, chaos above ground. And really, it's a similar situation when we're talking about growing our plants. So even though we're really only often seeing what's going on above ground, unless you're digging holes, like you can see in the picture here, we dug that hole just to see where our water table was and if we had a hard pan. But most of the time, we're really just seeing what's above ground, and that's a reflection of how things are going below ground. So just keeping that soil structure in mind is pretty important. And by leaving it alone, the tillage provides you with a short-term flush of air and water, but in the long term has pretty much done away with the natural structure that exists in terms of the earthworm tunnels and the soil aggregation. So by leaving that alone, it may take time, but over time you're building that up on its own just by leaving it be. And yeah, so that's soil structure. Very much related to that would be the soil biology. And so one of the things that I just loved and blew me away when I was learning about farming is that plants, when they photosynthesize, are sending a large percentage of the sugar that they're making down into the root zone to feed the soil biology. And it's really a symbiotic relationship with these microbes, akin to how how we digest food in our gut flora and in all of the bacteria in the gut. And so by leaving the soil be and not tilling it, you're leaving that soil food web intact, and the fungal hyphae and the bacteria and the earthworms are not being disrupted. And so keeping those microbes happy, again, by leaving their homes in place has certainly been beneficial for us on the farm. And we're seeing just a huge explosion of earthworms, which I take to mean that the other soil web is present, because it's, an earthworm is somewhat high up in the soil food web, and so I'm assuming that the presence of earthworms is meaning that the bacteria and the fungi and the nematodes and all that other stuff below those earthworms is present as well. So that's been a pretty neat thing to observe. For us, it's meant reducing machinery, and I'm not terribly mechanically inclined, so this has been a really nice perk for me. I didn't know how to fix the tractor when it broke, and that was frustrating. The oil use was a concern. We didn't have anywhere to store it, and so it just wasn't really being cared for well. So now a lot of these implements, we have a tractor, we have a rototiller, we have a harrow and a spring tooth harrow and a rotary disc, and we have a moldboard plow, etc., are really just like lawn ornaments for us at the moment. That being said, I think that for folks on a larger scale, this is something I think about a lot, like how could we scale what we're doing on an acre for a much larger system? And I think it just takes some minds to get together, and maybe this already exists, but to get some people together to think about, well, it doesn't mean we can't use machinery, it just means we need the machinery to work differently for us. So how can we have implements that would benefit a no-till system? So, for example, I think a lot about some type of implement that would help spread mulch out behind you, and that would certainly make this whole process a lot more efficient and scalable for a farm that has 10 acres or 100 acres or what have you. So I think it's possible. We just need to lend some time to either developing those implements, or if they're in use by folks now, just sharing them so that we can be doing that. So our next benefit is time. We've definitely observed saving quite a bit of time, and I think if we could mechanize the mulching, we'd save even more time. But we're not having to do bed prep year after year because we're operating with permanent beds now, so we'll talk more about that going forward, how we did that and how that's helpful. So we don't have to wait to make beds, and we were making beds with a bed shaper, and after we were disking in a cover crop or crop residue. So we're not having to wait in the spring when it's very muddy for the soil to dry out to then get into the field. So we can get a jump on this season pretty nicely. And then we're also saving time because we're not weeding anymore. Very little weeding is happening. So that time might be sort of used up with the mulching, so that might be kind of one-to-one. But then the benefits of we don't have to irrigate as much. Because the fertility is higher, the plants are healthier. So we're having less disease and pest issues. We're having more yield and better quality. So all those things kind of add up to time saving. So those are kind of the major benefits we've observed. If we have time at the end, I have some pictures of the crops and how the quality has improved. But I want to make sure we go over how to actually do this. So this is our garden experience we'll go through next. It's an acre, as I mentioned, and we were tilling with a tractor, lots of bare soil. Definitely one year had a terrible erosion problem. If people can see that picture on the left-hand side of the screen, running down the field, that was absolutely horrifying to see that erosion. We are on a slope. At 2, we've transitioned to very infrequently needing to put a tractor on the field. I think before last fall, I had gone 3 years without any tillage, but, we had an area that we lost control of with the weeds, and so we did till that up. But I think that the idea is to not be dogmatic about it and to, just reduce it as much as possible. So this here is what it used to look like. So I started in 2009. We did some cover crops going into the fall, but for the most part, there was a lot of soil that was bare, which is what contributed to that erosion problem. And it's actually quite humbling to have to share this, but I am because I think it's important. But I was a brand new farmer. I'd never managed a field before. I had worked on a few, but not managing, and was doing more of the use this product, don't use this product kind of organic growing, and missed the bigger picture. So again, that's why I started with that philosophy idea. And in doing so, we had what looked like this. So this is another picture from my first year. It doesn't look terrible, I guess, but when you compare it to this, which is what it looks like now, and here's another picture of what it looks like now, I think that hopefully you can pick up on through just in the pictures that not only do the crops look better, and there's, this picture here, you can see lots of weeds. There's a rototilled path on the outside of the garden because I was trying to keep grass from creeping in. But even more, the plants to me just look a little straggly and weak. And just the overall energy of this field in 2009, it just looks weak to me versus when you go on into 2014 and 2015, there's just a vibrancy and an energy and a strength that is more apparent, and I hope that is coming through and people kind of can pick up what I'm talking about when I say that in the later years. So these are the methods we're using. I just wanted to make sure it didn't sound like we were just only doing the no-till. We're doing lots of different things, but the ones in red are the ones that we're going to talk about today, how we're doing at the farm. But we are doing soil testing and remineralizing, and we're using drenches and foliars and other organic methods. But the no-till ones are the ones we'll talk about. So I'll just briefly go through this history. 2009 was, as I mentioned, my first year. We were doing spring tillage and fall tillage, and we were also using a black fabric, landscaping fabric. It wasn't exactly black plastic, but a landscaping fabric on our warm weather crops. 2010 was pretty similar. We did start mineralizing with rock powders at that time. We started mulching in the walking paths. We also were using clover in the walking rows, so I was just not wanting to be weeding the walking rows, so we gave that a shot. And we're doing lots of cultivation with hand tools, but more or less losing that battle each year, even though we had all the best intentions earlier in the season, which meant then we had to till again in the fall. 2011, those clovers that we were using in the walking paths were spreading into the beds, and So we ended up tilling that in, though that's something I'd like to revisit because I think that has a lot of value to it to have the something growing in the field versus just a dead mulch over the top. We really started increasing our mulch hay use around that time because we were having success in the walking rows, and so we wanted to do more of that. And so we had a number of beds that were mulched, and we had no weed pressure there, and so we kept those intact going into the winter instead of tilling and restarting in the spring as we had been before. Then in 2012, this was a real turning point because we were seeing success with the weed prevention from the mulches and the permanent beds, that we started doing a lot more of that. And then just to try how it went, instead of using a tractor to convert areas that were cover cropped or fallow or weedy, we were using pigs and chickens to give that a try. And that worked pretty well. And mulch became a real priority, though at this point we were doing it after transplanting, whereas in the next year we were like, well, why wouldn't we just do it right away? It is also humbling to realize, like, why didn't I think of this stuff years earlier? But it just takes time, I think, to make these changes. So anyway, we started mulching before the transplant. We established even more permanent beds. We just pulled the mulch hay aside when we needed to plant, and that was successful. We began using cardboard at that time. We began irrigating, though by this point I almost feel like we didn't even need to, but it is helpful to get crops established. But the mulch does such a good job with moisture retention and that's why I said it almost seemed like we didn't need to. And we were using a lot of various cover crops, and we switched in 2013 to using ones that would winter kill, because at that time we didn't have a good solution, a low intensity solution to taking out cover crops in the spring. And then in 2014 and 15, these were years where the garden was mulched year-round. We had all our permanent beds established, and things really started to take off quality-wise for us and plant health-wise. So that's a little bit of the history of the field. Certainly going forward, we're by no means arrived or established. We've got lots of ideas of things we want to do. And here's a list of them. We want to make some fungal, weed-free compost and IMO, inspired by what Brian O'Hara is doing in Connecticut. Definitely want to diversify the mulch we're using. We're using a lot of mulch hay right now, and I think there's a lot of potential in leaves, more fungally based and also free. So we're really excited about using leaves. Going back to trying those living mulches again, certainly. We've not done any solarizing, which is another method for removing crop residue, and definitely want to try that so that we can use a more wide array of cover crops and then remove them with solarizing. So solarizing is using plastic to have the heat of the sun take out the cover crop. And someone asked, what's IMO? That's indigenous microorganisms, so it's making your own cultivating your own microorganisms for inoculant for your field. We want to do more with saving our own seed that's growing on such fertile soil, and using that, and also taking a look at what's in our potting soil. We definitely need to deal with some thistle, so that's one of the drawbacks that we've encountered, that thistle has come in on the mulch hay. So we need to figure out a way to take that out. And we certainly want to just keep learning, see what other farms are doing. So this is what our transition looked like in numbers. I didn't include the first 2 years because I just didn't know enough about farming, really, to make those numbers valuable. So in 2011, you can see we were growing on 52 beds and grew 14,598 pounds of food. And then in 2015, with, 7 less beds, we grew 16,157 pounds of food. So to summarize that, we grew 10% more crop, so higher yield on 13% less acreage. And really, like, the actual number of pounds of food grown isn't what's relevant, because you could have an acre of lettuce or someone else could have an acre of winter squash. So that's not necessarily like what the relevant number is. But for us, since we're growing about the same proportion amount of food in the garden, we're growing for our on-site kitchen. So proportionally, the crops we're growing and their various weights are the same. So I think that's significant, to be growing the same, not just the same amount of food, but 10% more food on less land. And I do attribute that to increasing soil fertility, and a large portion of soil fertility has been about the no-till or reduced-till. So here's about the techniques that we're using. So these are the three that I feel like have been the most helpful in terms of the no-till. One is establishing permanent beds, which has been key to reducing compaction and to not having to rebuild those beds year after year. The next is preventing weeds with mulches. So weeds being one of the major reasons why we have to till to begin with. If we can stay on top of those weeds, that takes that out of the need. And lastly, using cardboard to remove crop residues or weeds if they do show up, or cover crops. And I'm definitely excited about solarizing, because it would be a much faster method, but we're fortunate to have a lot of people power at Heifer Farm, because we have all these groups coming through. So they really like being able to learn the cardboard method, so that's been working. But solarizing would be a much more efficient way to do it without that people power coming through the farm. So we'll dive into each of these, give you a basic overview of how we do it. The permanent bed idea here is just to designate where you're growing from where you're walking. For us, we're on a 1.5 foot walking row and a 3-foot bed. We used to be on a 1-foot walking row, but we have a lot of kids in the garden, and the 1 foot was just too tight. And you certainly could do this with equipment, a bed shaper or something, and then leave them intact, or you can do them manually if you're on a small enough scale, which we did quite a bit of that. And simply just by putting sight lines up, we dug out the walking row, raked it smooth, and then mulched it over. So pretty straightforward there. And part of the reason why we do raise them is because you can see in the first picture where that blue arrow is, that standing water there right next to a crop of freshly sown carrots. So if it had been flat, that could have had a lot more damage done to it from that heavy rain. We also have a really high water table, which you can see my very patient team members there standing in the water planting. So it hasn't looked like that in years as well, which I also think is because our soil structure has improved, but that's partially why we raised the beds. And so that's what it looks like after. You can't even really tell they're raised that much, because we put the mulch hay down in the walking rows and then eventually over the whole bed. But that's the basic idea of putting those permanent beds in place. In terms of the mulching, for crops that are spaced, say, a foot or more apart, we really look to mulch for weed prevention. For crops that are a lot closer together, we are still mulching in all the walking rows and right up to where we're seeding, but then we're using hand tools, hand cultivation, until the plant canopies out, and essentially the leaves of the plant, which I think you could see in this carrot picture, the leaves of the plant are blocking the sunlight from hitting the ground, so they're doing weed prevention on their own. But we are doing some hand tillage, very shallow tillage with these hand tools until that happens. So this is what the field looked like before we were mulching. We were using that landscaping fabric. We were doing lots of hoeing and hula hoeing, and really it was just a losing battle every year, despite our best intentions. So that's what it used to look like. Here's another picture early on. Raised up the bed with a bed shaper, went through and planted, and it was all pretty bare. You can see a little bit of mulch present in the walking rows, but a lot of it was bare soil that we were just trying to stay on top of it with hand tools. And here's a picture of what happens later in the year when the weeds just inevitably came. We used to have a wicked Gallenzoga problem, and that has completely gone away. We don't have any Gallenzoga anymore. Though we have the thistle we have to deal with, so that's kind of one-to-one. But you can see all the weeds in the walking rows, and we were just doing our best to clear an area then to eliminate the planting need there. So when you're doing mulching, so the considerations there's a couple things you want to think about: the spacing of the crop. If it's really close together, it is more difficult, so we use those hand tools. Or I've heard some folks are shredding their either leaves or grass clippings or hay and then shaking it out over the small seedlings, and then that's working quite well. The timing, you certainly want to be reapplying it if it's getting too thin, because otherwise the weeds will come up through the mulch hay, and then you've got a real mess. It's really hard to weed through the mulch, so definitely staying on top of it and reapplying. In terms of what you're using, it's what you have on hand, so the mulch hay, the leaves, the straw, grass, whatever you have will certainly work for you. Weed seeds, a lot of people are concerned about, and they do come in on the mulch hay. We're not, we didn't have access to straw. We had access to mulch hay. So the weed seeds are coming in, and that has not been a problem except for the thistle last year. Excuse me. Because we were reapplying enough, it was keeping them at bay. They just never had a chance to germinate. But we are looking at so that's a major reason why we're looking to switch over to leaves, so we wouldn't have that issue. So it's something to keep in mind, but if you are using it, and we have for 5 years now, without a weed issue to follow, it has been successful just as long as it's thick enough. In terms of your sourcing, I bought some mulch hay once, and it was just loaded with thorns, and my team never let me hear the end of that, so you might want to ask about thorns, and certainly want to be cautious, make sure there's no chemical residues coming in on the mulch. And in terms of thickness, you definitely want to go thick, so the sunlight can't reach those weed seeds so they germinate. So here's an example of what a transition period from tomatoes with the landscaping fabric and weeds in the walking rows to we then were mostly mulching the walking rows as a starting point, and then we moved on to just mulching everything. So we used to grow about 210 tomato plants, and now we grow about 50 to 70, and we get the same yield on the 50 to 70 as we did on the 210, if not more, because of the soil fertility supporting the plants, and they're living until frost now instead of dying from a disease earlier in the season. So that's been awesome. This is just an example of the thickness. The picture on the left is too thin, and you can see the soil and the weeds are going to come up through that, whereas on the right, it's nice and thick, and the weeds aren't going to get through there. These are just two more pictures of what it looks like when it's mulched. And in the picture on the right, you can see that was that experiment with the clover, which was quite nice. And then it started taking over the field and made transplanting really hard, but we're definitely going to revisit that. And then we go on to cardboard, which is awesome, especially if you're on a small scale, to integrate some cardboard into the field. It is quick and it's easy and it's free, and the earthworms go crazy under there, and you're feeding the soil as it's breaking down, and you're using this to either you could simply just be wanting to add fertility, but certainly it is useful if you can see in the photo, a cover crop or a weedy area that you want to take those weeds out without tilling it over. So the cardboard will smother the weeds and kill them, and leave you with a nice clean soil underneath. And in addition to just getting you back to soil, it leaves you with this beautiful, nice layer of worm castings across the whole thing. So in terms of fertility, it's pretty awesome because the earthworms, they just go crazy under there. They're feeding on the cardboard, they're reproducing, it's dark, it's moist, they're protected from the birds, so they love it. And that, of course, people know the benefits of worms and worm casting. So this is a field that we put in, or that we were managing, part of the kind of outside the main acre here, but this is another smaller pumpkin patch. So this is what it used to look like when we were tilling it. People are familiar with what that looks like. And then this was another year after it had gone to weeds. I said, let's just try it a different way. We did it with cardboard and then mulched it on top. And the method quickly here is laying all the cardboard down, putting compost over top to hold it down and add some fertility and keep it from drying out, and then mulching over that because our hay and compost, well, the compost, I guess, is what is relevant, has weed seeds in it. So the hay keeps those weeds from germinating. So that's a little bit about how to do the cardboarding quickly. And I see folks have some really good questions, so I'll try to get to those. Got just a few more slides to show you. I wanted to show you some of the benefits that we've seen. So this is how we used to do potatoes, furrows, tillage beforehand, furrowing, hilling, trying to cultivate weekly. Eventually got too busy to cultivate and ended up looking something like this. So then that makes harvesting pretty hard because you've got all your weeds there, and then that needs to be tilled afterwards to deal with all those weeds. So potatoes were requiring quite a bit of tillage. These days, since we've got the permanent bed in place and a permanent bed that's mulched, we're pulling the hay aside where we need to plant our potato, seed potato, putting that in the ground. Once that gets big enough, we're raking the hay, which has started to decompose quite a bit by then anyway, into the walking row, hilling it up, and then mulching all of that, which then come harvesting time, makes harvesting quite easy because it's in that tilled soil. So harvesting those without all those weeds in the way, and then just reshaping the bed with a rake, and then mulching or cover cropping after that. So that potatoes have been a really nice change, a lot of labor before. It's much easier now. And the yield here has increased 800 pounds without changing the acreage. Excuse me. So that has been a nice crop for us on the system. Here's another one. You can see the cabbage. You know, it's a different variety, of course. It's not apples to apples, but just to show you, like, you know, there was no mulch under there before. They were kind of small heads. They were planted at a closer spacing, and now with the mulch, we're getting nice big heads with not really any pest issues, and you know, you can see the basketball is there for a size reference. So that's been nice. Nice brassicas. So, you know, brassicas, this first picture is so sad. The Brussels sprout there in 2009. Got a little better in 2011, then in 2014 just had these really huge, nice Brussels sprouts that had 3-inch stalks. We had to cut them down with a chainsaw. I mean, it was ridiculous. So, you know, just a nice improvement there. Here's just various crops for people to look at. The eggplant has the arrow. They used to just be kind of scrawny, and now they're got a lot of foliage and a lot of fruit. You can see the fruit set on the peppers. The cherry tomatoes, nice fruit set. The summer squash, it just has a real sheen to the leaves, and we used to do 2 or 3 successions of summer squash, and now we just do 1 because the plants live longer. yeah, you can see the greens there. We used to have lots of flea beetle issues. We still do have some flea beetle issues, but they used to just decimate our little seedlings, and now they're not. That doesn't really happen. You can see the broccoli, nice broccoli with filled out stems. Alliums have been nice. So just a lot of nice improvement in terms of quality and yield and lack of disease and pests. But all that being said, I want to be clear, like, we still have plenty of issues. Potato beetle has been terrible in various years. It's gotten better, but we still have it. And like I mentioned earlier, we had some weeds just in an area where the mulch wasn't thick enough, and it just took over. So we did till that section up because we didn't have time to do the cardboarding and didn't have the products to do the solarizing yet. So again, it's a work in progress, but I think for the most part the trajectory has been positive. We went through a good amount. This is just more cardboard. That's on a bigger scale. We had a harvesting party of strawberries one day, and there were no walking rows, so that's another use. We used the cardboard to put back some walking rows without having to till up the strawberries. This is just a smaller scale I did with my parents. We'll skip through that. And closely seeded crops is kind of its own other area. And essentially, I think we could improve this as well. But what we're doing at the moment is seeding as you would normally into the bed, a clear bed that we've raked the mulch off of. And then once the crop germinates, as you can see in this picture, we're pulling the hay right up to the edge. So we're then running a hula hoe in the space between the crop, and eventually then it does canopy, as you can see in these coming pictures, something like that. So then you don't have to worry about it as much, but it is requiring some hand tools at the moment. So these are all the stages. So rake it aside, let it germinate, pull the hay right up to the outermost edge, run hula hose in between all those little spaces, and then eventually it canopies and you're good. Here's just another picture of the canopy. And that's a picture of me when I was tilling. You can see I just never really liked it very much. Versus now, I get a workout moving all that hay around, much happier. So yeah, we can do some questions now for folks. I see some on the sidebar here. Let me look through these. Slugs. A lot of people have asked about slugs. We definitely have seen some slugs, but the nice thing about the mulch hay is it regulates the moisture, so it doesn't just get like slimy and sticky under there. It does a nice job of keeping the soil moisture at a nice even keel. But I have heard, I believe it was Brian O'Hara who told me that slugs and aphids are signs that the soil could be a little bit too rich and too lush, and so it could be more about balancing minerals when you have slugs. What will we do differently to keep clover from taking over? That rhymes. I don't know if I know the answer to that yet. I just think it's worth thinking more about. So maybe letting it take over and just finding a better way to get through its roots to do transplanting. Possibly using a thicker mulch on the edge to keep it from creeping in. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that yet, but if we do this again in a year or two, maybe I will. Have you been able to enhance plant density with mulching? I don't know if that refers to density in terms of spacing, like how close we're spacing them, or the nutrient content of that. So if Daniel, who wrote that, wants to clarify, that would be good. Spacing. Okay. We have probably done the opposite, and our spacing has become farther apart because the plants are bigger and more robust. But the upshot of that is it means they're also putting out more fruit. So like we used to do our tomatoes at 2 feet apart, and now they're something like 4 or 5 feet apart. But the yield has been more than what it was when the spacing was close. So it's really letting the plant have enough space to do what it needs to do. We've done both determinants and indeterminate tomatoes. So yeah, I guess with the determinants you could try to go closer. But we're just trying to find the balance between, like, basically just so all those roots underground have enough space but are also connecting so that they have a nice network under there. Let's see. Favorite in-bed cover crop? Oh yeah, that's something else we want to experiment with, just doing a lot more cover cropping right under the crop. Oats and field peas are great winter kill cover crops, so getting started in no-till, those were really helpful for us to not have to then figure out how to deal with them later. So those have been nice for us. Let's see here. We talked about cardboard, remineralizing, yes, different rock powders, yep, trace minerals. I don't have a lot of experience in heavy clay soils. We have a more sandy loam where we are. So I wish I could speak to that more. I understand that that is a challenge. I think it could be worth having a little bit of your garden space to try it and see what happens. And if people are familiar with a broad fork, and there's also chisel plows and keyline plows, that different implements that can introduce air, oxygen into the soil without tilling it, and also will help balance that too, in terms of loosening up the soil. Brittany, you asked about. Welcome to read if you'd like. Early season living mulch. I don't know exactly if I know what the question is there, but I think living mulches are great. But if there's a question there, yeah, definitely rephrase. An increase in, yeah, that's, so the question about noticing an increase in the amount of mulch year to year, definitely. The soil, because the microbes are more active, you have a more robust microbial population, they're decomposing that mulch hay quicker. So we are noticing we are using more, which is another reason I would like to try the leaves, because they would be free. How many bales required to mulch the garden? That's a great question. So for a 140-foot row length and 4 feet width, if you include the walking row on one side, that takes us about 6 standard square bales. The cost, we are trying to get them at $2 to $3 a bale. So it's it's an investment in terms of the cost, but I think that the benefit has been worth it, but I haven't done a cost analysis on it. And the time to apply depends how good your team is at it, but you could do a bed in, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes. But again, I think that's an area where having, that's 140 foot bed, I should clarify, maybe 20 minutes. But I think that's an area where the efficiency, if we had a mulching, some type of mulching technology would be really helpful. Do I think plants are living longer due to soil temperature increases at the end of the season? That's an interesting question that I'm not sure. It could be soil temperature increases. It could be they've got the water they need or the minerals they need. I think there's probably a lot of variables there, but soil temperature could be part of it. We are still rotating. I'd like to try not rotating one of these days, particularly with the brassicas, and leave them alone. But at the moment, we still are rotating. Wood chips, not uncomposted wood chips because they're so carbon heavy. you have the worry of tying up your nitrogen. But we've tried them because we're using the mulching, which is more nitrogenous. We last year just experimented with sprinkling wood chips down in the walking row or the bed, and then mulching over it to try to balance that a little bit. I don't know how that will go. But I think certainly composted wood chips would be really nice, and we're really excited about ramial chips, the thinner branches that can be chipped, and trying to use those in combination with the leaves. Starting a new garden, yeah. So mow it down, cover it with cardboard, get the cardboard wet. Dried out cardboard doesn't allow for much gas exchange in the soil, so get it wet. Covering that with some type of compost is helpful, simply to just weight it down and then to help it break down. We used a lot because we've got huge compost piles here. We've got a lot of animals, but you could just sprinkle some over it. And then we followed that with hay, because the hay or some type of mulch is really what enabled it to not dry out, to be able to use in the same year. So yeah, we converted a pumpkin patch in like a month and a half, maybe 2 months, from sod to a pumpkin patch. And there was still sod under there, but the plants did okay. I mean, you look in nature and plants are coexisting, so I think they figure it out. But eventually that sod will have decomposed, and then you can just plant right in it. So yeah, yes, hay over the cardboard. Yeah, so it doesn't dry out. So I was answering those quickly because I wanted to make sure we had enough time, but if I was incoherent or did not address something well, please feel free to ask me to follow up. We've got a few minutes left. It's nice to see the questions coming in. I don't feel like I'm talking to myself.
Liz, you're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks, Brittany.
Good. Before we go, do you have like recommendations for people on resources that you've used to kind of help you through this process, or like websites, books, anything?
Yeah, I've had a lot of influences. There's very little original thought here. It's a lot of taking ideas from other people and just trying to see how it plays out in the garden. So Ricky Baruch at Seeds of Solidarity is where I learned everything about the cardboard, and he's got some really nice stuff on his website. So you can go check that out. And Dan Kittredge with the Bionutrient Food Association, learned a lot of concepts about soil from him, and he teaches really awesome classes. So I encourage folks to check him out. Brian O'Hara at Tobacco Road Farm has really got some amazing no-till systems going on a larger scale. So if people are looking at a larger scale, I would encourage them to go to one of his classes at NOFA. Those are the main people that are coming to mind. In terms of books, I don't know if I have a good book to suggest. Anything by Wendell Berry, but that's more of the philosophy. But we know how important that is. Yeah.
Well, Liz, thank you so much, and I appreciate you putting your contact information up here for everybody to see. So that's really generous of you to make yourself available, and I think if anybody has a question, it would be great if you could send it over to Liz. But I just wanted to say thank you all for participating tonight. You guys were a fabulous audience. We were able to get a lot of questions in there. Before we go, I do want to just thank our sponsors again, Frontier Natural Products and Lancaster Agriculture, for supporting the webinar. And Liz, I want to thank you. You did a fabulous job.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everybody. If you guys want to see the archived webinars, you can go to our website, nofamax.org/inspiring-ideas. That's the name of the webinar series, and we have last month's webinar already archived, and this one will be up. If you missed something and you wanted to take notes, or if you called in and you want to watch it, you can do that there. So hopefully we'll see you guys next month. We're going to be talking with Derek Christensen about using compost and fertilizers for some long season crops. So Thank you guys, and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.